Welcome back viewers, ladies, gentlemen, non-binaries and anyone with ears or other sound detection organs. Hope you enjoy. We are continuing with Going Native, written by Uncle Sealing. Going Native, Chapter 14. Elora was starting to get more comfortable with moving around the cabin. Careful experimentation had shown her the limits of her mobility, and, if she could stay disciplined and stick to those limits, Elora was pretty sure she could be useful without hurting herself. She just had to keep realistic expectations and not overdo it. Be calm. She had started her own investigation by trying to look through the piles of boxes, crates, and chests Stace had made, but Elora didn't think she could lift any of them without tearing something, and they were too low to the ground for her to investigate without climbing onto the floor anyway. Just another thing she would have to put off until she was better. Instead, she turned her attention to the chest of drawers pressed up against the wall opposite of the fire. It was homemade, like all the furniture, but it was obvious the human had spent a long time on it. The design was a little rustic, but, honestly, she wouldn't mind having something like this for her apartment. It was charming. After running her hand over the smooth, polished wood of the top, she slid the top drawer open. It held no surprises for her, just the maintenance supplies for Stace's firearms, the oiled leather he stored them in, and the box of ammunition. The human had taken the rounds he approved of and put them back in the box. The others were loose in the drawer. As she picked one out to look at it, she heard Ian call to her from the other room. "It's fine, I won't hurt myself," she called back at the male. He could be pretty excitable. Was he afraid she might set off the primitive brass cartridges? Elora was fairly familiar with human weapons and had fired a few at the range to better understand their capabilities. As she rolled the metal cylinder between her fingers, she realized that this was far larger and heavier than what she had used. The idea of firing it out of a pistol like the one Stace was carrying made her wrist ache in sympathy. Flipping it to look at the rear, she saw a thin green line of corrosion around the center disc, the primer, mounted in the brass. Stamped around the primer was 500 S&W. As she flipped the cartridge back into the drawer and slid it closed, she noticed Ian looking at her from the door. He seemed anxious. "See, I'm fine." As she reached for the second drawer, he held up a hand beseechingly. "I think that drawer is his personal stuff. Maybe we should leave it alone." The poor guy looked almost embarrassed. "It's no big deal. The map was in here, remember? There must other useful stuff, and I don't think our human will mind." She slid the drawer open as she was talking, then looked down. Of course, the first thing her eye was drawn to was the sex toy. The drawer had been divided into 3 sections. The rightmost section was narrow, and its only occupant was what was obviously a stylized reproduction of a human dick in a festive blue, the color of the sky. Elora stared at it in confusion, then looked up at Ian. He was flushed a much darker blue in what was definitely embarrassment by proxy. "I suppose this is why you said I'd fail at seducing him?" Ian gave a small nod. "That and, not being any good at it." The matter-of-fact judgment was so blunt that it made Elora smirk. "Hey, if it was too easy it wouldn't be worth doing." The left section of the drawer seemed to be the human equivalent of the traditional Shilvati junk drawer. Pieces of carved wood, a broken knife, a magnifying lens with a chip on the edge of the glass. She could see the map stuffed into the back of this section, along with a few more of those oddly shaped wooden game pieces. Bits of string, a few bent sewing needles. It was where odds and ends went to die. If the penis in the right section drew her attention, it was the center section that held it. She waved over to Ian, who bounded up to look with her as she started to rummage through what must be the artifacts of Stace's old life. A watch, a few bits of jewelry, a battered leather wallet. "I feel kind of guilty looking at this stuff," Ian remarked, though he made no effort to stop Elora as she pulled out a ring. At least, that's what she thought she was going to do, only after she lifted it realizing that it was 2 rings intertwined. One was gold with a silver inlay and the other was the opposite, a matched set that had been permanently joined. As she examined them, Aing pulled out a thick leather book and let it fall open. The book was a photo album, the entire page showing some sort of ceremony. There were two men standing in front of a third, holding their hands in one another's. It took a few moments before Ella realized that the taller man was Stace. He was younger and clean-shaven, but he had the same sharp cheekbones. The smile on his face seemed genuine in a way she had never seen from him. The other man was almost as tall but not nearly so broad, with a darker complexion. Aing flipped the page. Stace and the other man, standing in the same place. The man was sliding a gold ring with a silver inlay onto Stace's finger. Flip. The same two men, both holding a knife and cutting some sort of giant confection. The glint of a matching silver ring was clear on the man's hand. Flip. The smaller man, sitting on a rock looking out above a forest, his smiling face lit by the setting sun. Flip. Flip. There were dozens of photos. Few of them had Stace, some had other people, but by far the majority were of the man with the dark complexion and narrow shoulders. Stace was almost unrecognizable in most of them. It took a few moments to realize that it was because the human actually looked happy. Thinking back, she could see how false every smile she had ever seen on the man's face really was. The Stace they knew was full of a deep sadness that wasn't in these photographs. Ella felt guilty as Aing kept flipping. She knew she should stop him, and judging by the guilty look on his own face he knew it too. Damn it, though, they were both curious. Aing spotted it first. Look at this. He pointed at Stace's companion, then flipped back to near the beginning. The change was obvious. The human was noticeably more gaunt, paler in the more recent photos. As they continued moving forward through the book, it only got worse. Finally, Ella put her hand down over the book. Put it away. We've done enough snooping. The rest of the afternoon was subdued, Aing and Ella going through the motions of making an inventory of the cabin, both stuck in their own thoughts. Aing had known something had hurt Stace, had made him come out here and isolate himself, but seeing it so plainly in those photographs made it hit Aing at a far more visceral level. If she thought he was dead, Merin must feel the same way Stace did. Perhaps Ella felt like that too, with her pod dead in the same crash that stranded them here. Aing did not have much experience with loss. The closest parallel he could think of was when Merin deployed and they decided he should stay behind until things looked better on the newest planet of the Shilvati Empire. They both had contact, though, even if letters had been slow. Stace seemed to have nothing but photographs. He thought back to that night when Stace had awoken crying. Had his wounds really not healed in 10 years? Would they ever? Not like this. The more Aing thought about it, the more sure he was. Stace had come out here to escape his pain, and it hadn't worked. We're taking him with us. The words shocked Aing out of his thoughts, and he turned to look up at Ella. He could see the reflection of tears in her ink-black and gold eyes, and realized his own must look the same way. After a moment, he realized that he hadn't replied to the soldier. We're taking him with us, she repeated. When we get out of this frozen hell, we aren't going to let Stace end up back here like this. It's not right. Aing just nodded in agreement. By early evening, the inventory was as done as they could make it. Ella knew that it was pretty much useless without Stace there to identify things, but even if she didn't know what a particular thingy was, she at least knew they had 6 of them. Aing was cooking something over the fire, but she hadn't paid much attention to it. Neither of them knew how to use the ingredients and neither was in the mood to actually put effort in, so it looked like the male had just picked a few things and threw them in the skillet with the last of the sausages. As Ellora was trying to clear some space on the table, she stopped. Her ears twitched as she tried to pick up the tail end of a sound. "Did you hear something?" "What?" Ian looked up from where he was poking the contents of the skillet with a wooden skewer. "I didn't hear anything." Ellora moved towards the door, pistol ready. They had decided to keep it barred as long as someone was awake to open it, perhaps a little backwards, but it certainly made them feel better. After Ian had given her a single statement that hurt more than the last 10 chewings out she got from her superiors, she had endeavoured to make sure she was better prepared, so Ellora was already dressed and ready to go. Before pulling the plank out of the door, cracking it open, she pulled on her makeshift poncho. The blast of cold was painful, but this time she knew what to expect. She stood at the cracked door for what felt like 10 minutes before she heard the noise again. It was much closer this time. A whistle. "Ian, get dressed. I think we have incoming." "Stace." Ian pulled the pan off the fire, then ran the few steps to her and started pulling on his oversized coat and gloves. "I don't know. I just heard a..." She was interrupted by the sound of a gunshot, then another. The pair ran out into the dark, Ian staying behind the Marine while she kept the pistol raised. It was a sort of half-darkness, the reflections of the moon and the stars on the snow providing enough light to see by. There was a large shape, impossibly broad at the shoulders, stumbling towards them. As they watched, it turned and Ellora could see the reflection of starlight off of steel as the pistol came up, pointing back behind the figure. Another shot rang out into the night, and for just an instant the ball of fire coming out of the barrel of the revolver illuminated Stace with something large on his back. Ellora handed the pistol to a stunned Ian. "I'm going to grab Stace. You get ready to shoot whatever is chasing him. As soon as I get him inside, you bar the door." "Got it." Ian nodded and wrapped his hands around the pistol. The small part of Ellora that was making idle observations was impressed. He was barely shaking despite looking utterly terrified. Running the 100 meters or so to Stace was easy. Ian wasn't able to keep up, but hopefully that wouldn't be a problem. As she put on as much speed as her frozen legs would take her, the human stumbled and fell hard onto his side in the snow. He was trying to stand back up when Ellora finished closing the distance. She grabbed him, but Stace just shook his head. "I'm fine. Grab the caribou." Ellora hadn't really processed what was on his back until that moment. It looked similar to the pictures in the guidebook, but they hadn't prepared her for the actual size of the thing. She grabbed the front and back legs, which Stace had apparently tied together, and heaved. Ellora staggered before she managed to throw it over one shoulder. How the hell had the human even carried this? It must have weighed more than he did. The three stumbled back to the cabin together, piling in with Ian guarding the rear, pistol ready. Nothing seemed to be approaching, so he slammed the door and slid in the bar. The 3, 4 if you counted the food, practically moved as a heap as they made their way into the cabin proper. Finally, Ellora was able to drop the carcass to the wooden floor and take a look at their returned human. Stace was able to give her a faint smile before he collapsed. Ian barely managed to catch the human as he went down in a heap, stopping Stace's head from bouncing off the floor. His pale skin felt hot and moist, far warmer than he remembered. Ian frantically started stripping the large man, looking for wounds. The human's entire back, shirt, and jacket were coated in sticky blood, but none of it seemed to be from him. That was a relief. As Ellora joined in, pulling the rough woven shirt over Stace's head, the man seemed to rouse a bit and said something in that dumb human language. He seemed to be a bit delirious, but the other two were having something of a conversation at least. To be honest, Ian wasn't paying them much attention. He was looking at Stace's chest. The entire upper right side, starting from his shoulder and dropping down past his nipple, looked like one huge bruise, so dark purple it was almost black. The dark patch wrapped all the way around under his arm and onto his back. "Ella, what the hell is this?" She gave it a glance, then sort of froze and asked Stace a question. He looked down at the mark, attempted to shrug, hissed in pain, and made a comment. He said he's turning into a shilvati. Iing's response to Ella's translation was to cuff the human in the back of the head. He chuckled, then said something else. Ella froze, then said what? Iing actually knew that word, but the tone made him nervous. When Stace repeated himself, Ella looked at Iing with a face full of what could best be described as confused horror. He said he tore the muscle. Yesterday, Iing felt his own face pulling into the same shape. "You mean he carried that?" He gestured to the caribou carcass lying on the floor. "For an entire day, with a torn pectoral." While the English chatter went back and forth, Iing continued to look Stace over. It looked like there wasn't any of him that wasn't at least slightly bruised. Noticing a cut on Stace's temple, Iing gently used his fingertips to brush the hair on the side of his head out of the way, the hair peeling out of the bizarre red blood. The cut wasn't too deep, but Iing knew what human ears looked like. They were rounder on top than proper shilvati pointed ears, but he did not think they were supposed to be completely flat on the top with at least a centimeter of height missing. He could see a scar ridge along the top. It was an old wound, likely healed for years. He had never noticed simply because Stace always wore his hair down. Iing ran a finger along the edge of scar tissue. It was too smooth to be a bite, as if it was made by a knife. Or a scalpel. "You okay over there?" With a start, Iing realized he had been stroking Stace's ear. His face flushed from lilac to blue and he let out a little cough. "Yeah, I'm fine." "How is he doing?" "Exhaustion, a fever, and apparently he tore half the muscles in his body carrying our lunch. He had those mini Raikiri chasing him for the last kilometer or so." The noise from the pistol helped keep them back. Ella frowned. "I think we are going to be taking care of him for a little while." Everything hurt. Stace lay next to the fire, shirtless and exhausted, but he was satisfied. He had made it back. He started to zone out a little bit. His head was fuzzy, and the light in the room felt muted. He had been talking with that woman. Why was she purple? But he couldn't quite remember what she had said. It had taken the last of his energy to focus for that, and now he just wanted to sleep. As he lay his head back, the room seemed to spin. He started to close his eyes, but someone was calling his name. With Herculean effort, he pulled the world back into focus. "Ha!" The purple woman was holding his shoulders. "How can we help you? Do you need medicine?" Shifting his eyes, he could see another purple figure holding a white steel box with a red cross on it. What was it? "Focus, Stace. Focus." The figure opened the box and started laying out the contents so Stace could see them. Reading was a chore, his eyes didn't want to focus. Stace reached across with his good arm and used a finger to tap a couple glass bottles. It was all long expired anyway. With his message sent, he closed his eyes and fell into blissful unconsciousness. With Stace either asleep or in a coma, Ella had some difficult decisions to make. As she mulled over her options, she found a core of resolve. She was not going to let another one of her pod die. The bottles Stace had pointed out had long technical names printed on them. One was mostly empty and she recognized it as the antibiotics he had given her. The other one was nearly full. She took the tablet and searched the long name, then read the results. Some sort of anti-inflammatory and pain management drug. She made a guess of Stace's mass, did some quick shill to human unit conversions in her head, and started filling a syringe. What are you giving him? Ian looked concerned, but he wasn't moving to stop her. At least he trusted her far enough to give Stace what he asked for. Painkillers and antibiotics. From what he just told me, I think he needs rest more than anything else. The pair looked at Stace, collapsed in a heap on the floor. Ella's wound was throbbing, and she didn't look forward to the possibility of lifting him and putting him in the bed. We probably shouldn't move him around too much. Ian took a moment to arrange Stace so he was laying comfortably, then put a blanket over him. Ella wasn't sure if Ian was trying to look after Stace or her with that statement, but it was sensible. Now lift up your shirt. Obediently, Ella lifted the side of her shirt so Ian could look at the incision. No tearing, though it does look inflamed. He touched it gently and Ella let out a hiss. Yeah, that's what I figured. Relax and I will sort out our new edible friend. From what they had read, the easiest way to manage the caribou was to hang it up. Stace had apparently done this before as there was a spot in the ceiling that had obvious wear. Ian stood up on tiptoes and slipped the rope through the gap above the ceiling beam, then tied it to the rope between the back legs. Satisfied with his knot work, the male grabbed the loose side of the rope and pulled. Nothing happened. Ella couldn't help but laugh as the little man hung from the rope, trying to pull up a caribou that weighed far more than he did. After receiving a glare from Ian, she walked over and grabbed the rope, adding her own weight. Once the caribou was up, they tied off the rope on a peg in the wall and Ella sat down on the chair to go through Stace's pack. Inside was an empty water skin, blocks of dried meat of some kind he had been using as field rations, and a leather sack that turned out to be full of raw caribou organs. Though she felt slightly sick at doing it, she poured out the sack into a bowl and tried to identify them. Heart, liver, kidneys. Stace had left everything else, it seemed. She looked up to see Ian consulting his tablet, having already started the effort of skinning the caribou, any drippings landing in a bucket. Ella's stomach clenched and she felt like she was going to lose it. Ian, again, came to the rescue. Can you grab any large containers and fill them with snow? We will need to process the meat later but it will spoil if we don't pack it in ice or something in the meantime. Just be careful. As Ella collected containers, she couldn't help but marvel at the situation. Ian had taken charge of both her care and the caribou processing quite naturally, pitching in just like any member of her pod would. Her first instinct was to assert her authority, but there really wasn't a reason for it. They were a team, and while he took to his self-assigned roles she would take care of keeping the three of them alive. It was only as she was about to head outside that she remembered the dangers. Ella came back and placed the containers next to Ian, still empty. I'm not going to open the door unless there are two of us ready to go. One to grab snow and one to shoot. We'll get it when you're done or when you have to take a break. After listening for a moment, Ian nodded. Makes sense. I got so excited to see Stace again I kinda forgot about those wolf things. Me too. A gentle silence fell between the two, the small lilac male awkwardly butchering a kill while the large soldier sat in the chair, trying to rest her aching abdomen. It was only when a loud growl came from Ian's stomach, causing him to smile awkwardly and apologize, that the two remembered the half-cooked meal by the fire. End of chapter. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, click the bell so you don't miss any episode and do all the other YouTube stuff, visit and support the author, and I'll see you next time. If you didn't enjoy, comment on what I can do better. And as usual, have a wonderful day.